Okay, welcome back to the next part of the video. In the last video, we took a brief look at the trajectory planner so that we could have some resource for finding dates if we want to use that resource. But as I stated at the end of that video, I'm actually just going to go ahead and use TransX for the purpose of this mission. But if we wanted to, we could pick one of those dates out of Trajectory Planner. So I have the XR2 selected, and I'm going to jump inside, and I'll just keep this large view open so that we have big MFDs as opposed to these smaller looking MFDs. I'll bring TransX up on both sides. And I just want to state, first of all, that this mission isn't a beginner type of mission. A beginner type of mission with TransX, would be more along the lines of just going from the Earth to the Moon or from the Moon to the Earth. So I'm not going to go through every little detail of TransX like I do in some of those other videos. I just can't take the time to do that in every video, or else I would add an additional, half hour or 45 minutes just explaining TransX in every video. So I'm going to have to assume that you're able to follow along with what I'm doing. Right side MFD, we're going to go escape. And then we're going to go forward to create a new stage. And we're going to select Venus as our target. And then we're going to go forward to create stage 3. And then come over to view encounter. Then on this side, we're going to go forward to stage 2. And press VW to bring up the eject plan. Now, I'm not really going to configure TransX at this point. The first thing I want to do is, again, I want to find a date. So I'm just going to do the very basic planning here. So I'm going to start by adding in negative prograde in order to bring my orbit down so that I'm at the orbital, altitude of Venus around the Sun. If I added in positive prograde, that's if I want to extend my orbit out so that I would go to Mars or Jupiter or something, and I don't want to do that. I want to come in closer to the Sun because Venus is one of the inward planets. So I'm adding in negative prograde, and I'm just going to put in enough negative prograde to get my orbital altitude down here so that it's touching the orbit of Venus. Now, I can see here that on this date, which is today, Saturday, April 27th, 2013, that if I were to leave and try to come over to Venus, that Venus is way back here and I'm way over here. So the first thing I need to do is bump the date forward. And I can use the course setting at the start since we're going forward by many days. We're not just trying to bump time forward by seconds or minutes. We're trying to go forward by days or even months. So we can use a course setting for here at the start. And as we bump the date forward, we can see the closest approach coming down and these lines getting closer together, and that's what we want. And right now I'm just looking for a rough date. I'm not trying to configure TransX all the way, down to down to where I'm right at Venus. I just want to get a rough date. We're getting pretty close. Closest approach here is showing 5 gigameters. So maybe we can go down to a medium. We're just going to continue adding in date until that number kind of, won't go any lower. And it's right here at that point. So 56582 is what we want. Make a mental note of that. And what I'm going to try to do, if Orbiter will let me, is use the scenario editor to change the date. And I've noticed that this sometimes doesn't work, in particular with the SpaceX stuff. So if this crashes, I'll just have to restart Orbiter. So 56582, apply. Yeah, I don't know what's up with SpaceX, but it's one of the more buggy add-ons, so I'm just going to have to close Orbiter. And instead we'll use the text editor. And we'll put in date MJD 56582, I believe was the date. Actually, we'll even go one before, so that we've got a little bit of extra time. I'll save that and relaunch Orbiter. And we'll go back to that temp scenario. And now we've got a date of October 16th, 2013. I'm going to press W to get rid of that. F3 to select the XR2. And F1 to get back inside. And now we'll set up our TransX plan. So escape, forward, Venus, forward, come over to this side, forward, and the eject plan. And now we can sort of make a mental note of the planet positions. We can see Venus is, back here kind of behind Earth by, whatever that would be, 30 degrees, something like that. Just something to observe so that if you're, looking at it in the future, you kind of know where the planets have to be in order for a trip to Venus to work. Now we'll add in our negative prograde. Go to an adjustment, and we're just going to bring the closest approach down as much as it'll go, which is looking like about there, somewhere around there. Then we'll go to change plane. We'll add in some plane change until it won't go any lower. It's kind of bottoming out there, so now back to prograde. And we can go down to a finer setting, maybe ultra with the date, and just kind of bump it out a little bit. You can see that's helping. And we need to leave at some point in the future anyway. About right there. Now just back and forth between plane change and prograde primarily. Okay, yeah, we need to bring our orbit down. You can see that dashed yellow line is above the orbit of Venus, so we definitely need more negative prograde. In fact, we can ignore the closest approach for a moment and just bring it down so that we're touching, and then we can go back over to plane change. And the orbit's still not where it needs to be, so back over to prograde. Getting in pretty close. Let's do the date again. Just kind of play around, see what we get. It looks like it's where it needs to be. Okay, I can see the line here above the orbit of Venus, so I'm going to kind of ignore the closest approach for a moment and bring down the altitude. I'm going to mess with the date again. And on this side we can view the encounter. That's got us pretty close. Let's back up for a second and look at stage 1. According to TransX, the total delta V that we need here is 11.79. That's a little high. It's not too bad, but I would prefer to see it more like 11.2. So what I would like to do is come forward on this side and see if I can back off either plane change and or prograde in favor of using date instead. So let's take away some of this plane change. Let's go to a fine setting. You can see obviously it's raising the closest approach. But let's see now if we can fix that just with date. So now we're at 11.59. Maybe take away a little more plane change. Now we're down to 11.45. And back here to date. Yeah, I'm able to clean this up a little bit, getting rid of some of that, getting rid of some of that extra delta V. It's always good if you can have a lower delta V cost. So just by adjusting the date a little bit, you can lower your fuel cost. Looks like we need. Okay, let's see if we can bump the date around a little bit. Down to 11.28. That's pretty good right there. If I can keep it somewhere around there, I'm pretty content. Just pushing out the altitude a little bit because it looks like we're a little on the low side there, and then we'll kind of try to fix that with plane change. Yeah, that's got us pretty close. Okay, now see if there's any last little bit of date adjustments we can make. Okay, so that's about as low as that's going to get. Now we'll dial in the difference just with the variables. Okay, so I just want to find the lowest point. 232 with prograde. And about 205 with the plane change. But what I'll do now is I'll actually continue adding negative plane change, which is going to raise the minimum altitude. We'll go out to say 500. But then when I come back with prograde, it will be lower overall, because before it was 203 or so where it was bottoming out. Now we should bottom out below that point, and if not, then we went the wrong way. Yeah, so now it's down to 193, and if I keep adding in prograde, it'll get to a low point here. 36, 34, 30, 2018, really low. Now it's bottomed out. It's going back up. So I'm just going to put in a little bit of extra prograde this way. Now over to plane change. And as I come back that way, we'll probably be all the way down to the surface or very close to it. Looks like I overdid the prograde, so let's go forward here. Find the low point again, that's 39.9. Now plane change. 29, now prograde. You reach this point where you have to kind of go back and forth between the two variables in order to dial in the last little bit of difference, and it gets a little tedious. So let's go that way. Okay, there we're down to 12. Let's just overshoot it a little bit. Let's go to 14. Now plane change. Has us down to 4, 3. Okay, let's overshoot it a little bit out to say 7 or 8, 9. And then we'll go with prograde. And yeah, there we go. That has us all the way down. And you can see we're actually crashing into Venus. At that point, we're 500 kilometers below the surface. So we'll just back up a tad. And that's our Venus. That's our Venus encounter. Now if we back up here to this side, you can see that we got our delta V cost down to 11.15. And that's about average. You know, that's what you need for Venus. If you're seeing your delta V out to, you know, 11.8 or 12, or definitely if you're over 12, then there's a good chance that your plan's not set up very well and you need to back off and play with your variables a bit. Alright, now that part is for getting over to Venus. But you remember, we can't land on Venus because it's a pressure cooker. The temperature is too much for the XR2, and the pressure is so great that if we did land, we wouldn't be able to go anywhere or do anything because the engines become inoperable with that much pressure. So what we're going to do, I was kind of playing around with Inkscape, trying to learn a little bit about how to use it. And this is what we're going to do. We're starting off here at Earth, and we're saying that we're going to lower our orbit around the sun. The sun's here in the middle. So we're going to kind of, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. So we're going to take this path out to Venus, fall in here, come around, and then we're going to come by Venus. And as we approach Venus, when we get, you know, down where we're within its gravitational influence, you know, when the gravitational meter according to Orbit MFD starts showing, you know, 0.01 and then 0.50 eventually and so on, then Venus is actually going to start pulling us along with it. You know, because remember, Venus is orbiting the sun, and as we get close to it, Venus is going to start pulling us along. So we're going to get a velocity boost, in fact. So as if Venus wasn't here, you know, if Venus didn't exist, and we took this path, then our orbital path would be like this. We would come around this path, and then we would basically just go back around like that. But since Venus is here, once we get down and we're closing in, then it's going to start pulling us and giving us a bit of a velocity boost. So by the time we go past Venus, by the time we sling past Venus and go out the other way, we have a new orbital trajectory. So we're no longer following this red dashed line. We're now on a new path that will take us out past the orbit of Earth. And we're actually going to sling way out. I don't know if that's quite out as far as Mars, but we're going out quite a ways beyond the orbital ring of Earth. Of course, I should have mentioned this blue ring is the orbit of Earth around the Sun, and this ring is the orbit of Venus around the Sun. So this will be our new path. We're going to come all the way around until we finally come back down, and we'll catch up with Earth here. Now, in the time that we go from here to here, Earth is actually going to go all the way around the Sun one time, plus an additional quarter of an orbit. So that's basically the plan. And we've only got the first part set up. Right now we've only got the part set up where we're going to go from here to here. So we've got that part done. Now we need to set up the sling part. So stage 3, we'll go to view setup, escape, forward, and the next planet in the sequence is going to be Earth. And then we'll go forward on that side just to create the stage 5. Now with Sling Direct, over here we want outward angle, and I don't know if it has to be plus or minus, so we're just going to go plus and see what happens. And it looks like it's about right there. Now inclination. Do a little bit of an adjustment there. And I'm just adjusting the outward, finding the low point for the closest approach. Our timing is a bit off, it looks like. Okay, so what I'll do then is over here in stage 2, I'm going to mess with these variables a little bit to see what we need. We'll start with just a little bit of date. Okay, so just by bumping the date out a little bit farther, so we're all the way to 56591. And let's adjust our variables. And we'll go more in the date. And remember now, this of course is obliterating our approach here at Venus. We'll have to clean that up. Okay, we've kind of hit a low point there. So let's go see what more we can do with our outward and our inclination angle. Looks to me like we're going to need either a bit of plane change or some prograde. Let's try prograde first. Looks like that's helping. It's having the desired effect to a point. So now, a bit of plane change. And that's not really doing anything for us. Let's see what outward does. That's not helping in either direction. So we're going to reset outward. And let's try date again. Okay, so we've kind of hit a point here where date's not helping, outward's not doing anything, plane change did nothing. So let's see. Prograde. All right, now let's play with our variables on sling direct a little more. And before I do much more here, let's go back to stage 3 and let's kind of clean up our sling a little bit, because now we're way off. So I'm looking at the PE ratio. Let's bring it down before we do anything else. Bring that around a little bit, prograde. And come back around to sling direct. Looks to me like our timing is just a little bit off. We're getting in pretty close over there at Earth, and we could make this work. We could sling Earth, rather Venus, and then do another mid-course correction when we were out here. But I don't really want to do that. The question is, are we ahead or behind schedule? We started with 56580, and we went all the way forward to 56592. Maybe that's too far out. Let's back off the date. Okay, let's start with that date. Now, since I made a big change there, I'm going to go to View Setup on this side, and instead of Escape, we're going to go None. Press forward, and that'll erase the sling. Now I'll come to View Encounter over here, and I'll work on getting things set back up on the original date again, and kind of start back over as far as setting up the sling part. Because I think we may have overshot the date. So let's see what we need variable wise. Okay, let's kind of start there. Now we'll go Escape, Earth, forward to create that stage, and then Sling Direct. Let's go forward on that side to view the encounter. Let's bring up Sling Direct over here. And now we've got Earth over here. Let's see if we can make this work. Okay, so that has us all the way over to Earth. We're actually hitting Earth here. P velocity 13.97 is pretty high, but we're not happy with our slingshot yet. So back on stage 2 on this side, slingshot on that side. Got to do something about that P ratio, obviously. Check plan. And change plane. Alright, we're in the ballpark. So let's go forward again on this side. Forward over here to make sure our sling still works. Yeah, that'll be fine. So now I'm just trying to dial Earth back in. And there we are, we're hitting Earth again. So let's just clean that up a bit. So we've got a P velocity at Earth of 13.85. Again, that's a bit on the high side. And there is a better way to do it, but I'll address that in a different video. There's a way, I'm not going to get into it now. I'm going to do a whole nother flight of this, but I'm going to do it a different way. Alright, so we've got that. So let's go back to the slingshot and stage 2 on this side, and now we need to dial in the PE ratio and relative inclination. And let's check our delta V. Our outward delta V, or I should say the delta V that we're using to leave Earth, is a little high. Again, it should be closer to 11.2. But all things considered, that's acceptable to me. Maybe if I played around a lot, I could bring it down. But I don't want to risk, throwing off the encounter really far. And actually, this PE rate, this PE velocity isn't bad. It's a bit high, but it's not, 14.5, which is what I'm more used to seeing for this type of flight. So this being a little bit high in favor of having a more survivable PE velocity is a good trade-off. But I do need to get this stuff here figured out. Okay. So a little bit of positive on the prograde is bringing the relative inclination down. Let's go over to change plane. And getting this part worked out can be really tedious sometimes. But I think I see what we've got to do. Yeah, it wasn't too bad this time. Sometimes I can spend 10 minutes just getting that part worked out. Okay, so we've got a PE ratio of 0.9857, so we're almost there. Trying to bring down the relative inclination. Okay, I'm going to get as close as I can. And let's just see if a little bit of outward will help resolve that. That's like obviously way too much. That's good enough. That's workable. Alright, now let's go forward finally one last time to stage 5 on that side and stage 4 on this side to clean up the sling direct stage. And it shouldn't take much at all. And a little bit on the inclination. And there we have it. Unfortunately, that raised our P velocity back out a bit, so we're at 14. That's high, but again, that is survivable barely. Alright, let's take a look at everything one last time. Let's go all the way back to stage 1, and we've got a delta V of 11.57, so that means once we get up into orbit, we're going to have a cost remember, orbital velocity is 7,800 meters per second, so if we take 11,570 meters per second minus 7,800 meters per second, then we're saying that we're going to need a burn of 3,770 meters per second when we do the burn to go over to Venus. Alright, let's save this. Control S, so we've got our plan saved. And that'll be the end of this part. That was our setup and planning for TransX. There's still a little bit more to do, you know, with the PE distance and the eject orientation, but we'll cover that in another video because this is already coming up to 45 minutes. But I just wanted to go through and show, you know, the setup for what we're actually trying to accomplish. And again, if we take one last look at the Inkscape diagram I made, we're leaving Earth, coming around, falling toward Venus, slinging Venus, going back out past the orbit of the Earth, around, and then we're going to meet Earth after, you know, a full year plus of its orbit around the Sun. And that's most obvious here in stage 4. You know, you can see we're kind of ballooning out past the orbit of Earth and coming back down. If you have any questions about this part of the video, go ahead and leave those questions down below, and I'll see you in the next part of Venus. Now, I can see here that on this date, which is, you know, today, Saturday, April 27th, 2013, that if I were to leave and try to come over to Venus, that Venus is way back here and I'm way over here. So the first thing I need to do is bump the date forward. And I can use the course setting at the start since we're going forward by many days. We're not just trying to bump time forward by, seconds or minutes. We're trying to go forward by days or even months. So we can use a course setting for here at the start. And as we bump the date forward, we can see the closest approach coming down and these lines getting closer together. And that's what we want. And right now I'm just looking for a rough date. I'm not trying to configure TransX all the way, down to stage 2 and press VW to bring up the eject plan. Now I'm not really going to configure TransX at this point. The first thing I want to do is, again, I want to find a date. So I'm just going to do the very basic planning here. So I'm going to start by adding in negative prograde in order to bring my orbit down so that I'm at the orbital altitude of Venus around the sun. If I added in positive prograde, that's if I want to extend my orbit out so that I would go to Mars or Jupiter or something, and I don't want to do that. I want to come in closer to the sun because Venus is one of the inward planets. So I'm adding in negative prograde, and I'm just going to put in enough negative prograde to get my orbital altitude down here so that it's touching the orbit. First of all, that this mission isn't a beginner type of mission. A beginner type of mission with TransX, would be more along the lines of just going from the Earth to the Moon or from the Moon to the Earth. So I'm not going to go through every little detail of TransX like I do in some of those other videos. I just can't take the time to do that in every video, or else I would add an additional half hour or 45 minutes just explaining TransX in every video. So I'm going to have to assume that you're able to follow along with what I'm doing. Right side MFD, we're going to go escape, and then we're going to go forward to create a new stage, and we're going to select Venus as our target, and then we're going to go forward to create stage 3, and then come over to view encounter. Then on this side we're going to go forward to... Okay, welcome back to the next part of the video. In the last video we took a brief look at the trajectory planner so that we could have some resource for finding dates if we want to use that resource. But as I stated at the end of that video, I'm actually just going to go ahead and use TransX for the purpose of this mission. But if we wanted to, we could pick one of those dates out of trajectory planner. So I have the XR2 selected, and I'm going to jump inside, and I'll just keep this large view open so that we have big MFDs as opposed to these smaller looking MFDs. I'll bring TransX up on both sides, and I just want to state, down to where I'm right at Venus. I just want to get a rough date. We're getting pretty close. Closest approach here is showing 5 gigameters, so maybe we can go down to a medium. We're just going to continue adding in date until that number kind of won't go any lower. And it's right here at that point. So 56582 is what we want. Make a mental note of that. And what I'm going to try to do, if Orbiter will let me, is use the scenario editor to change the date. And I've noticed that this sometimes doesn't work.